Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lisa Muscatine, and we have a very special presentation for you this evening. It's an anniversary celebration marking the start of the 5th year of the Liberties Journal of Culture and Politics. And not only is the journal's top editor here, Leon Wieseltier, in conversation with him will be the great Wynton Marsalis. Now, Wynton didn't come alone, nor does he intend simply to talk. With him are a couple of other musicians, Philip Norris on bass and Damo Branch on drums. They're going to perform this evening, and one of their pieces will be something new composed just for this occasion, Fanfare for Liberties. Liberties is an independent journal that publishes quarterly and features essays on significant issues about culture and politics. Just look at the last few issues this year for a sense of the range of topics that the journal addresses. The spring issue had a piece by Washington journalist Tim Noah called A Prayer for the Administrative State, and an article by former Marine turned author Elliot Ackerman about mercenaries. The summer issue carried an essay about Alexei Navalny following his death, and a piece about the depiction of Zionism as colonialism. And the current fall issue has an essay by education professor Jonathan Zimmerman pushing back against opponents of higher education, and a piece by fiction writer Ryan Ruby presiding over the unlikely meeting of Emily Dickinson and Franz Kafka. It takes an experienced editor with a view of cultural and political trends that's both broad and deep to manage a journal like Liberties. And that's what Leon brings as the publication's editor. He was literary editor of the New Republic for many years and has written several books, including Kaddish and Against Identity. In the audience, too, are a couple of other people key to Liberties, Celeste Marcus, the managing editor, and Bill Reichsblum, the journal's publisher. Wynton, of course, is one of jazz's greats. It's been 42 years since his first solo album, and over the years, he's gained acclaim not just as an exceptional trumpeter, but also as a composer, bandleader, educator, and leading advocate of American culture. He composes and performs across the spectrum of jazz and continues to experiment, innovate, and inspire with his music. He serves as managing and artistic director of jazz at Lincoln Center, a director of jazz studies at the Juilliard School, and president of the Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation. Wynton and his group are going to perform first for a bit, then Wynton and Leon will talk, and after which, I wouldn't be surprised if we get treated to a little more music. So please join me now in welcoming this very special group at Politics and Prose.
Philip Norris on the bass. Damo Branch on the drums. Damo Branch. Yep.
I'm on the microphone tonight. If Liberties could be a trumpet, I would hope it might sound something like that trumpet. And if Liberties could be a bass, I hope it would sound something like that bass. And drums, I hope it would sound something like those drums. So thank you, really, really. When Bill pointed out to me that we were about to celebrate our 5th birthday, which in these days, in these conditions, I mean, we were started in the middle of a pandemic, it feels almost like an eternity. I knew right away how I wanted to do it. And so we're here tonight to celebrate with Wynton and with Brad, because all three of us, Wynton, Brad, and myself, what we really have devoted our life to is sustaining and improving and protecting the traditions, the arts that we've inherited. I mean, Brad is one of the saviors of the bookstore during a time when bookstores seemed to be on their way out. And Wynton, he is, well, I have to say that, I mean, I'm going to embarrass you now. I'm sorry. Just, you just balance your checkbook for a few minutes. Wynton Marsalis is one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. We've been friends for 40 years. Yeah, I know. 40 years. And he's not only the master of his art, he's also the conscience of his art, both institutionally and what he plays, how he plays it, who he plays with, where he plays. This is a man who, he's not just a great musician, he is one of those people that I really admire, as is Brad, he's an institution builder. And institution builders are the people we depend on. Most people wake up in the morning and want to see what's on offer to them at institutions that other people have built. But then there are the people who build the institutions, and et cetera, anyway. And at Liberties, we are trying to preserve, protect, and defend the intellectual traditions that we have inherited. Liberties was founded, as I said, in a terrible time. It was a pandemic. We were operating out of a very charming, but if you ask Bill, somewhat Dickensian little red brick carriage house, this little 19th century place, which was perfectly safe because the staff of Liberties until last month consisted of 3 people, all of whom are here. We got the whole staff to come tonight, yeah. And the idea, there was a feeling that things were cracking up in this country. The culture was cracking up, politically we were cracking up, and there was a feeling that I certainly had, and that of the intense fragility of what we value, that it was no longer time to take it for granted, that or to assume that if we don't act on its behalf, it will persist anyway. I mean, I've always thought, and Wynton's whole career has been a proof of this for me, that if you inherit and contribute to and develop a tradition, but you don't pass it on, you've betrayed it. So the idea basically is what we value cannot die on our watch. I don't know what it's going to be like 100 years from now, but my tradition's not as long as I'm here. And I remember early on, 40 years ago, that's sort of how you felt about jazz after rock had imperialistically taken over everything and people were playing jazz that wasn't remotely jazz. And I mean, you had this feeling that, wait a second, after Ellington and after Basie and all that, I mean, you can dance to whatever you want, but let's not call it art.
Well, we can call it art, but let's not call it art. It's art, but we have
use your mic.
We can call it art, but we have an identity. It has a value.
Yeah.
Like, it's not necessary for everything to be one thing. Like, it can be rock and roll and all the music, funk, what I grew up actually playing. It exists well as itself. It does not also have to be jazz.
That's right. So
there's always, that's more my thing. Now, it's all art to me. I mean,
yeah.
It's all.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you're a little more generous than I am because because in my field, there's, we try to keep the standards high and sometimes frighteningly high. And if people are afraid, I think that's sort of appropriate, because the decline has been precipitous. Just precipitous, not just in the way people write the way they write or play the way they play, but just also in how much has been just forgotten. I mean, the things that people don't know about anymore. I mean, I had a young person ask me last year, came up to me and said, who was Thomas Aquinas? And I said he was a very important 12th century influencer. because I figured that might be a way to begin the discussion. So, one of the things I learned from you is the importance of standards, and you got attacked for this for decades. For decades,
They still attack me.
they still attack you. Yeah,
Happily.
yeah, yeah.
I'm grateful for it.
Well, no.
I am.
A man should be known by his enemies.
Yes.
I think if you have the right enemies, you're doing something good. Yeah, yeah.
But it's also just important for me to say, because people may not know just how long we've known each other and just the tenor of the conversations that we've had. And of course, with the wide range of subjects that Leon knows about, and his curiosity and the depth of things that he knows. When I first met him, it was all just me asking him, man, what is this? Or what does this mean? Or I read this. Or I'd send him something and say, how would you interpret this? Or what is this? I was used to being around. I had fantastic mentors like Murray and
Crouch.
Ellison and
Yeah.
Crouch.
Yeah.
So I was used to being around really super intellectual, engaged, and intelligent people with very strong opinions that you didn't have to necessarily agree with, but you had to be qualified to disagree with them. So by the time I met Leon, it was not a problem. Like, I was used to being with people who were talking about stuff and I didn't know what they were talking about. So I got over the stage of saying, you know what I mean? And I'd be like, yeah, I got over that. And with Murray and them, I was saying, no, I don't. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain that? And over the years, it's been so rich for me. I just want to give them one story about, I was leaving a class of students I had at Juilliard, and I was talking about Thomas Mann's book, The Coming Victory of Democracy.
Right.
So I was thinking, something I don't understand about the book, about how he's referring to fascism or what it was like in Europe of that time. So I was driving back matter of fact, we had just played a concert in D.C. and I was driving back. I was in the car and I was thinking about the class. So I called Leon, and it was maybe 10:30 or something at night, and we started to talk about it. And I had a copy of the book that was copied from a copy you had sent me.
All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I had the book, but I lost it at some point. It's difficult to find. So I had it on a copying paper.
Yeah.
And then we started to talk for a long time about what did fascism mean at that time. And a lot of times we have conversations that are, through these years, it's not all railing about what's wrong with stuff. Yes, something is wrong with stuff. But for us to move stuff forward, we have to get people to have a belief in the transfer of knowledge, a respect for knowledge, and a respect for correcting things, and of the open dialogue. That just because someone may know a lot more than you doesn't mean you know something they don't know.
That's correct.
And that's why it's important for me to have these two young, fantastic musicians. They're truly the greatest musicians in their age group at this time. I mean, they are. And I told them I just want them to hear Leon talk. I want them to, no, because they hear me talk all the time, and I can talk about stuff. I don't mind. But I think it's important for people to know that even I sent you a passage of scripture. We were talking about something,
Absolutely.
and you
That's
wrote
right.
back and said,
That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I do. Do you remember we became friends in the sweetest way? We were having lunch, our first lunch at the restaurant of blessed memory, the Café des Artistes on West 67th Street. And we got to talking about Bird and about his version of Embraceable You. And all of a sudden I went, da, 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 da.
Couldn't believe it.
And then you went, da, 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 da. And then I went, da, 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 da.
He's singing the right interval right now. You heard him sing that minor seventh, right?
No. And after that, we were friends. I think that your fundamental point and the thing you've always stood for is right, which is that, especially in dark times, it is a sacred duty to turn people's attention to what is positive and forward-looking and valuable, because no historical darkness, no political darkness has ever succeeded in destroying our artistic and cultural traditions. They tried.
Right. But in our time, because we have the ability to communicate, in our country we can do that. And we can use the tools of communication. It's never as open or free as you would want it to be. And it's certainly a lot less free than we think it is, but it's still possible. I think it's important for us to realize that when we're communicating with people, we're recruiting them to a point of view.
That's right.
I spent years really attacking stuff because I like to do that. It's fun. And there's a lot to attack. But ultimately, you don't get a lot of people to your point of view
Right.
by attacking other stuff. Because after a while, they're like, okay, fire and brimstone, that kind of apocalyptic eschatology.
That's, yeah.
You can only attract. You have to keep creating victims. Now, in our culture as a musician, there's there's so much information that you can always attack, because for some reason the eagle has landed on music and decided to just turn it into feces at every turn. So you can always talk something bad about it. But to get people around to a point of view, there has to be some light, some brightness, some hope, some belief, something.
Right.
So it's more important to let the light in than it is to try to pour the darkness out.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to know that in all the years that we've talked, it's not been just a complain fest.
No.
Oh, this is what's wrong. It's been like, hey, did you check this out? Or did you read this? Or what does this scripture
That's
mean,
right,
man?
that's
Or
right.
you could look at it like this. Or this is what this. I remember once I asked you about I am that I am.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I was writing a piece of music called
Right.
All Rise, and my 12th movement
Right,
is called
right.
I Am. He said, well, you don't realize really the word is
It's
it means something in the backwards that it means forward.
yeah,
I don't know if you
Shara,
remember
yeah.
that.
In Hebrew, it's I am. It is actually I will be what I will be, but it's I am that I am, or I am what I am. Yeah.
But you were telling me that the word is written in a way that it's the same thing backwards as it is forward. That was
Oh,
something you
that's
were
right.
telling me.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly, but it was. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's not
No.
what he said it was though. So I'm trying to.
I don't remember.
Yeah, you don't have to remember.
This is what we call the oral tradition.
Yeah. You don't have to remember. You don't have to remember. But it's just I wrote this whole music and the other words are thy will be done, right?
Yeah.
Thy will be done. And it was come from what you told me. It had because you won't remember the conversation, but when you said I will be what I will be, I will come and say, yeah, but that's a projection into the future. So if all there is now, well, what do you mean you will be? We might not be here to be when you will. And you were like, man, come on, man.
Well, but look, and one of the things that we're always resisting in our culture is this kind of presentism. Everything is now. You got to be in the moment. And I've always thought, well, actually, you got to be a little behind the moment or ahead of the moment. If you're always on the moment, then you become obsolete really quickly. And, it's a kind of disease of perfect contemporaneity. But you got to either be behind or you got to be ahead.
Right, it's like in an obstacle course.
Yeah, that's
If you're
right.
looking at that obstacle, you failed the course.
Right.
You got to know, you got to feel it. It's like a speed of instinct, because you can only perceive the past. You can only experience the present, and you can only anticipate the future. So those are the things that you can only do. You can't do another thing. You can't be in the future. You can't be in the past. You can only be in the now. But, that's why we don't just keep sticking our finger in electric sockets. We remember, oh, don't do that. Let's... And it's interesting for jazz musicians because we always deal with time. Yeah. Like the reason Philip and I laughed when Damo was soloing, at a certain point, we didn't know at the end of a chorus whether he was going to whether we were going to play fours or whether he was going to open it for his solo. So we couldn't tell by what he was playing, but the form is passing by. It's like a clock. 12 measures in the form. So when you get around measure 9 or 10, you start looking for a cue. Yeah, right. But he didn't give us any he didn't look at us. So we started to look at each other like so maybe he knows, maybe. So he didn't know either. So we both kind of decided, I think he's going to take it himself. So he kept it himself and he played short. I wanted him to play longer, but he wanted to play short. So we started to laugh because we said, okay, he's going to keep playing.
Maybe a little longer at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Damo, anyway, the point of playing is that thing of the present, because we don't know really, and we're all making decisions. Like we can't decide for him how long he wants his solo to be. So it's an approach and a way to living that keeps you from having a type of despair when you're projecting too far in the past or you're too far in you're too much. Oh, this is going to be this way for me. Because the times we're in now are not any darker than the times in the 60s. You know, I remember asking my father once, because he of course he grew up in absolute segregation.
Right.
I grew up in basic segregation. I asked him if he thought that segregation would ever end. The type of segregation he knew, not the segregation we practice now. And he said, no. And he said that when Kennedy got killed and Johnson became president, he thought, man, Johnson from Texas,
Yeah.
forget about it.
Right.
And he said there was no way that he would know he would throw away that portion of the Democratic Party for the next, whatever it is.
Yeah.
He said 50 years. Johnson said 50 years. He didn't know it was much longer than that.
Right.
But, and he said that's why you have to always be ready.
Yeah. Well, the most important thing, I think spiritually, artistically, the most important thing that a person can have in life is a sense of possibility. That's the most precious possession. And, you know, and sometimes when I hear jazz improvisations, to me that sounds like the aural, A-U-R-A-L, equivalent of the sense of possibility. Like you play these notes so you can play those notes, so you could go here now.
Right.
You know?
Right. We were talking about on the way up here, we were talking about a song by Monk called "Let's Call This," and we were in the car coming here, the three of us, and we were trying to learn the tune and remember it. I just said coming off the train, man, let's try this tune. Let's call this. So Philip and he started to play, and he had to change it to so I started playing. He was singing the bass lines, and Damo started tapping with his ring on something. He was on the cane. So we were playing, you know, real soft in the car. And then at a certain point, Phil was just making up stuff because he's singing, and Dumbo did a rhythm, and I was interlocking with the rhythm, and he started laughing. He said, "You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?" and I was saying that we, in the old band that I had with Hurlin Riley and Reginald Veal, this is 30-something years ago, long before they were born, and we used to always play around and sing songs and clown and act a fool. And we would say, man, why is it when we get behind our instruments, the spirit we have now of playing around and joking and all this, why do we not retain that? When we get to the trumpet and the bass and the drums, we get into the formal aspect of how we play. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other thing. Let's try to play like if we're just on the bus playing for each other. Yeah. So that ties into what you're saying about the sense of possibility, because it's almost like you go back to when you see children play with action figures, how all of a sudden a soldier is a building with hair on it. And then that the hair starts to talk to the car that's coming by.
Right.
And the car that's coming, and it's telling the car that's coming by, watch out, there's a whole group of them flying in. If you just look at them play with stuff, you think, damn, where did that go in me?
Yeah.
It's important to retain the childlike sense of possibility.
Sense of possibility, yeah.
I worked in a gas station when I was a kid. There's a guy named Bossy Clay. And he was the type of old guy who was cussing you out, telling you dumb as the box you're sitting on. He had a lot of good things like that. Boy, you dumb as this damn box you're sitting on.
Very character building.
Yeah, I loved him.
Yeah.
I loved him. But the thing he used to always say to us would be like, what did that take? God, you're dumber than this carburetor, boy. And he would say, I've been your age. You ain't been mine.
Oh.
So I always think about it like, okay, because that means that I can now access all the ages I've been.
But that's
you
right.
cannot access that, and that's a part of the positivity, the human experience. Like for us to just retain all the things that we actually know and feel, not as skewed memories that we certainly are lying about.
So you enlarge your vocabulary in ways that allows more combinations, yes. And you can from your own experience. That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's you know, the thing about improvisation is that it's really great if somewhere behind it, even if most people can't hear it, there's a structure that it's coming out of.
That's what I tell them all the time. I like part of how we lost a lot of our audience was that when I don't know what you're doing at all.
That's right.
Man, I have to really like you.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, like you're talking to me in a foreign language. You know, some people speak a lot of languages and they like to let you know you can't speak this language. I'm just going to speak for 20 minutes in it.
Right.
It's like,
well, like damn, for example, the piece that I was talking about before about Birds Embraceable You remember? There's no trace left of the tune, the melody. It's just not there. So some people would know the chords and they'd say, oh, that's Embraceable You.
At that time, they would be able to hear it.
Right, exactly.
At that time, people would know
exactly.
it.
Because they were literate about those
that kind of
things.
stuff, yeah.
That's right.
Now,
That's right.
no, they would not know that.
Right. I mean, it's like Renaissance paintings. If you look at Renaissance paintings, and in the 16th, 17th century, the people who saw them would actually recognize the biblical figures, no matter how obscure, or they'd recognize the mythological figures. They knew a lot about that, or Greek mythology or Tasso. Now, all they can see are the colors and the forms because they can't read it anymore because the knowledge has been lost.
That's why it's important for us to always circle back to the knowledge as if
Yes.
it's not a mystical thing.
That's right.
I mean, there is mystical knowledge,
Yeah.
but there's also just basic knowledge. And if you just talk to people like they know it, or you know this, you don't make it be some type of secret club that you're invited into, or you're dumb because you don't know things.
But that's right. You exclude them. That's right.
Yeah. So, and that's the other advantage I had being around Ellison or being around Murray.
Yeah.
I never knew what they were talking about, but they treated me like I was their grandson.
Well, they did.
So then I
didn't-
started to figure it out. You know, it's like, well, you need to
Murray
read
thought
this.
you I mean, I remember the times we were together. He thought you knew what you put on a good act, is
was
what I'm
acting.
trying to say.
Man, Murray was there. First of all, just the book, the amount of information he had.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, just
Yeah.
what he had read
Oh,
and what
Lord.
he knew.
We're talking about Albert Murray.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
First, he gave me the Joseph Camp. I mean, he gave me the Thomas Mann's book, Joseph and His Brothers.
Oh.
Okay, it's only like
That's not a book. That's a
600
mountain.
pages, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, if you don't read this book and then come back here, and if you don't read it, don't come back. But then I was 17.
Oh.
So I looked at it. I said, damn.
Nobody
I
ever
might
did
not
that.
be. It might not be back here.
Oh, yeah. Nobody ever did that to Dizzy Gillespie. I'll tell you that.
Hey, we don't know. You know?
We don't know. Yeah, yeah,
don't know.
yeah. No, but the thing is, so you get this situation where the structure obviously comes partly from the past
Right.
because it exists prior
Right.
to the improvisation, and it's the same with intellectual life. I've always thought that the challenge is you have to have some conviction, but you have to keep your core of conviction small, because if you've got a passionate conviction about everything, then you're frozen. Then you're never gonna.
Right. You're hard to talk to.
So you have first principles, and then there are issues that are difficult to adjudicate. Then you can do it this way, you can do it that way. But without first principles, you can't even get started.
Right.
You can't even get started. And I'm sure musically that's true also.
Yeah. Well, that's why the U.S. federal Constitution is so much shorter than state constitutions,
Yeah, right.
because the framework has to be concentrated.
Yeah.
If the framework poses such difficulty and it's so complex, you can't play on it. Like Duke Ellington would write really complex pieces. Like he wrote a piece called A Tattooed Bride. And this may be, I don't know, Tattooed Bride is 13 minutes, right? That's right, 13 minutes. And it's a lot of written material. But when people solo, it's stuff they can play on.
Yeah.
Like he's not saying, well, I wrote this and I'll play on this difficult. He gives them maybe one chord to solo on. So in terms of the fundamental propositions that you lay out when you have to improvise or when you have to do something, a look, man, no hands type of thing,
Right.
you better be no hands in it on something that's related to solid
That's right.
ground
That's
somewhere.
right. That's right.
And it's sometimes we get lost. There's a thing we do in jazz now. We'll pick a song that's very difficult to play, like John Coltrane's Giant Steps, which even now has challenges harmonically because the chords are changing in a kind of augmented way, in an unusual way, even for today, every 2 beats. Then a rhythm section will take that song, which you already struggle on, and play it in 5/4 or in 5/8 with a clave and 7, and you'll be like, damn, I'm already lost. Now, in addition to the opposition of this form, which I don't sound good on, it's now in 5.
Yeah.
So for something about complexity makes you want to make the underlying framework more complex when actually you have to.
The question of complexity is really an important one because, it has to be legible. It has to be legible at some level, not to everyone, but, and if it gets too complex, then it becomes a kind of private writing.
There you go.
Then it becomes, so I understand it and good for me.
Right.
You know, and as a writer, I've always, you know, I know I'm not the easiest writer, but I've always had this rule: nothing should be more difficult than it has to be. And you don't just, you know, this is not about showing off. Right. It really isn't. You know, I remember once, 100 years ago, I was listening to, there was a live recording of Eric Dolphy. He lived in Sweden or Norway or somewhere for a while. And there was a live recording of him with a rhythm section. And at one point in the record, I listened, I thought to myself, they don't have a clue where he is. I mean, it's not even warm.
Right. That's very possible.
Yeah. And so, but it's also, that's taking it a little too far.
Well, yeah, it's not for us.
Unless they weren't up
it's
to
not
his
for
musical.
us to determine what it is.
Yeah.
But there's a belief in a kind of abstraction, that abstraction is the way to be modern.
Right.
And when somebody doesn't know what you're abstracting, I question that all the time. Like, okay, all of this is modern to somebody who's never heard it. Because I grew up with my father being a jazz musician, and all that music was abstract to me. I listened to music on the radio, which was, for my generation, stuff like James Brown, Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, those kind of songs. And to hear people play the stuff my father and them was playing, man, what are they playing? Now, if they had taken that and said, well, for us to be really modern, we have to now refer to German music from the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and they are our model of abstraction. Why are they a model of abstraction for us under completely different circumstances? What is it? What about all of what's in our music that's valuable? We're going to discard all of that for a form of music that even it's even questioning where it comes from.
Yeah, yeah.
The people where they're from are looking at it saying,
well, there is a
certain
certain
these decisions we make.
There are certain kinds of people, readers, writers, who think that it's good to be esoteric.
And it is good sometimes.
Depends what you're saying.
It's fun.
It's fun but the reason it's fun is because only you and 3 other people can understand it. In other words, I've always thought that esotericism, usually you can say most things or play most things in a way. Let's say, take the musical example. You can play a difficult conception in a way that's also pretty, right? You can also attract the ear and not the mind. You can attract them both.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing about esotericism, I've always thought, is that really it's a way of creating a social distinction between those who get it and those who don't. And if you don't get it, then you don't get it.
Yeah, it's a certain type of in club.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I remember reading the story about Richard Wagner, of course, great genius composer of opera. He was also fancied himself a philosopher. He was a mentor of Nietzsche. So Nietzsche was like it. Later he turned on Wagner, but when he was younger, Wagner was his hero. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was him or it was somebody's account of it, that Wagner was reading some of his own turgid 19th century Germanic philosophical forays. And he said in the middle of it, Wagner realized he didn't understand what he was reading of his own work. And he said that at a certain point, Wagner was very dramatic and he was just reading it. Yes. And he said when they got to the point, he said, what does that mean? And he said, I don't know. And they both started laughing. Yeah. And they just cracked up. So sometimes it's just for fun, you know. It's right. But it is.
But, you know, you remind me, there was a story, Celeste has heard me say this story about, there was a great Yiddish writer who hated a certain Yiddish literary critic, and he wrote an essay against him. And in the essay, there appears this immortal sentence. He said, it is not enough to write in Yiddish. You have to have something to say. And, you know, finally, I remember we were once talking about some new tenor players. This is decades ago, and I'm not going to mention who, because at one point he was very famous downtown. And you said to me, he can play, but he has nothing to say. And I took that with me because it's really, yeah.
Well, that's what they always say about me. So they say, Ben, you're talking a lot and you're not saying anything. That's what Sweet used to always tell me. He said, baby boy, you just played more notes than I ever played in my whole damn career. Oh. When you gonna play something? I said, it's okay, man. How old are you, Sweets? He said, it's not a matter of age, it's a matter of intent. Well, so I mean, the reason I'm giving that example is that all of these things are circular. You know, it's not a right or wrong. This is what we do. This is what we talk about. Yeah, my man was playing. It was probably sad. I played sad too a lot of times. Yeah, I listened back to it and thought, damn, what the hell am I playing? You know, what? I'm just hoping my solo would end if I hear a tape of it. I mean,
But but wouldn't you say that it's true that when I listen to some of the classical trumpet players, I mean, Lewis, but also Sweets and others, you get the feeling that they don't play the way we do, but not because they couldn't. It's because they chose not to, because their authority on their instrument was so supreme. It's like these famous, the Great Shock, when those Nigerian bronzes were discovered from the 13th century, from Benin, and they were discovered, and everyone went, holy shit, they could do representational art. And I thought to myself, of course they could do representational art. If they didn't do it, it's because they wanted to do something else.
Right. Well, there's a level of arrogance that attends ignorance. And when ignorance and fear come in, that arrogance. But I always like to find these things in myself rather than in other people. Like I tell this story a lot, but it's a type of story that's accurate. So our bass player that we play, his name is Carlos Henry. He first came to my house when he was 13. Yeah. And he was from the Bronx, and he came, and Stephen Akendo's a trumpet player. He was always saying, man, you got to hear my boy Carlos play. You got to hear my boy Carlos play. You got to hear my boy. Finally, Carlos came to the house, and Carlos, he came in immediately. He was like my little brother or my son or something. I mean, I loved it because he's funny kid from the hood, soulful, joking around with me, clowning. We playing around and joking. So we start to talk about Latin music. And this is like the greatest example of like some arrogance and some ignorance. And I said, man, the problem with Latin music is y'all play on one chord all night. It's never any harmonic diversity in the music. He said, yeah. He said, He said, can you tell me what any drum is playing at any time that we're playing? So I was looking at him. He said, yeah, Papa. That's why you think we need to have a bunch of harmonies in between that. Wow. So now he's a little kid. Yeah, wow. So I was just looking at him, and then we both started to laugh. Yeah. And he said, let's put this on. And we put it on, and damn, okay, what is this part? Did I know what those parts were? Hell no. But I had an opinion about it. Right. So whenever I'm talking about someone or something that is like a kind of arrogant ignorance, I always go back to those things in my own experience where I exhibited the qualities that I am against. So I can be sure of how that I'm accurate, because I know my ignorance was and my arrogance, it wasn't purposeful. It was just ignorance, and it's allowed me to look at it, to try to just tell people, listen, you don't really know what this is. This is actually this, and just him telling me. I mean, of course, that's many years ago. Now I've learned so much from him in this time about the music and the traditions, and it's important as you grow older, I think, also to always, because you have a tendency as you get older to think that the world is fixed in the way that you thought it would be fixed, and that whatever is not the way you thought it would be is because it's wrong. Yeah. And the truth of it is, like my mama used to say, you just another out here.
She was right, except when it's wrong. Yes.
There you go.
The journal was founded in part to address this question of complexity, because one of the reasons this country, and we're not going to go down that sordid path, but one of the reasons this country is in such trouble is because a lot of people are having trouble keeping up or even understanding the complexity of their ordinary experience. It's all, there's a kind of panic, not just about change, but about there's too much that matters so much that they can't understand it. Like, who understands healthcare, or who understands climate science, or who understands finance? And so what I saw was that everybody's getting freaked out by this complexity, and the way to help to begin to solve it would be to recover the first principles in some way. It's like, okay, let's put the complexity aside for a minute, and we'll start with the fundamentals and reassert them and develop them, sort of in the way, in jazz, the first principles are the blues, right? I mean, that's the Constitution, right? And every once in a while, when I listen to certain people play, not you, I think to myself, Jesus, would you just play a blues? Just it's like rinse my head from all this.
The fundamentals are difficult.
Yeah, they are. That's
like,
right.
It's like you may love your mother or your son or your father, but it's hard to tell them you love them.
Yeah.
Like in many instances, if
Yeah,
you don't come up in a tradition where people express that kind of thing, the deeper feeling you have, it may be like for someone like my father, that was impossible to say.
Oh,
Like it just was not in his experience. But it doesn't mean you don't feel it. And many times the fundamentals are, they're fundamental. Like and if you don't practice them all the time,
yeah.
then you lose track of them. Like smiling at a person, saying good morning, saying thank
Right.
you, just basic manners it's so much lack of manners,
Yeah.
and it's just, but those are a matter of practice, and they're not to put it into our daily practice. And
Yeah.
with our government, I think we have a repetition form, right? A form that is repeated.
Yeah.
City government is the state government is the federal
Yeah.
government. And when we don't teach our kids that, like when I was growing up, we would go to the city government, we would go to the state government, and then you didn't have the money to go to the federal government, but
right? Yeah,
you
yeah,
knew
yeah.
that it was there. You understood it. And in jazz, it's the same way. It's the repetition of form.
Yeah.
That you have these same forms being repeated over and over again. It gives you a chance to come to grips. And we are dealing with huge topics. Like when someone says the American people,
Yeah.
Hispanics.
Yeah.
Who are Hispanics?
Right, right.
That's a lot of people.
Right.
Somebody said, "What do you think about Chinese people?"
Yeah,
The
right.
other day, because
Love them.
I was in China. I said, 1.5 billion people. Yeah. What do I think about 1.5 billion of anything?
Right.
Like I don't. That's a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we tend to deal with, what about just, I noticed just from nights of always being on gigs and seeing couples and people, and every gig I always talk to everybody, sign, take pictures, just how hard it is for an older person to admit, and I'm in the older group, I don't know how to work this cell phone. Let me not make you stand here waiting 5 minutes to take a picture when I have 6 kids here, any one of whom would take a much better picture.
Yeah.
Say, well, and I always
Don't
crack
ever
a joke.
call me about that.
No,
I mean, it's just,
I always crack a joke and say, I always get to find the youngest person, just give them the phone.
Yeah,
Can you
right.
let them? No, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get
right.
this.
The shortest person in the
I'm
room.
gonna, because of your condition, they can't even see these icons. I'm going to
Right.
get this. I'm going to get this. Look, I
Right.
know you cannot see these. I too can't see them.
That's right.
Like, let the person who can see them take the
Yeah,
picture.
we got to look for the arthritis emoji,
No,
and we
yeah,
just
yeah.
can't find it.
The arthritis ad is on our phone. You want to know the age? But it's like these are fundamental things, but they're difficult.
Yeah.
know?
And repetition is the most fundamental and the most difficult subject, because on the one hand, you can't do anything valuable without repetition.
There you go.
You can't. Like in music, those ridiculous experiments of Webern, who would do these 40-second, 90, because he said, no more repetition. We state the theme or the harmony or the rhythm, and you've got the message. And you listen to them, and they're dead. They're
Well, yeah.
dead.
The music in the world is only repetition.
Well, that's
so,
it. However, the flip side is that nothing can deaden things the way repetition can. So it's always the only solution. You see this in religious life. You can go to church every Sunday, and if you go to church every Sunday, it's going to start feeling a little familiar and regular and boring because the repetition is going to start, right? And the only model I have ever found, the solution to the repetition problem.
Audience questions soon.
We're gonna have to do audience once you're finished with this audience questions. Yeah, you want to make sure next time for music.
Got it. So the point that I want to make was, and I'll make it really quickly, is that the only solution I found to the problem of repetition is actually in music. It's theme and variations.
Well, all human life is a theme and variation.
I mean, but that's right.
So
That's
you
the
can't.
thing.
We are all variations on the two people that created us.
Well,
And
yeah.
then there are variations on those people, and there are variations on. And I was talking to Crouch one time, and he was talking about. He was making a comment about Picasso and what Picasso said he got from African art, and he said, "Well, you got to realize that if you're in Africa, you're seeing many more faces than you are if you're not there." He was talking about all the faces of all the animals. He said, not only are you seeing more faces, you're looking at those faces.
Yeah.
Because some of them might not, if you don't look at them, you might not see another face.
Right.
He said, so
Right. I
I don't want to get in trouble.
No. You won't be in trouble. No. But the point is, you couldn't have variations without a theme.
Right.
Otherwise, you just have entropy, anarchy.
Oh.
It would just be, right?
And I guess that's also a question of what just basic meaning. Like, what is your theme?
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
What is your theme? Like,
Right. Describe your theme.
Many
right.
times it's important to know, well, what are you trying to tell me? Like, what are you trying to tell me you don't like me? You trying to tell me you love me? You don't like
Yeah.
people? Nothing is anything. My country is nothing. Traveling, sometimes I have to do that because I'll do interviews with people in countries that don't like the United States, and they know the tension in the United States. They say, black dude. They say, well, man, I know you have problems in your country. But before the interview, I tell them, listen, there's a lot in my country I don't like.
Yeah.
But I don't really talk about my country when I'm not in my country, like my brothers. There's a lot I don't like about them, but
Right, right.
I'm not here to talk about them.
Right.
So I'm not going to talk about your country if you don't talk about mine.
Right,
But
right.
if you talk about mine, I'm going to talk about yours. So that's basically like playground. You know, it's like you're going back to being 7 or 8 years old. But in most instances, people are gracious, like they understand. Hey, we don't have to, let's talk about something else. Like let's not, so what is your fundamental meaning? That's, and I think it's something we've lost
And it's
sight of
important
as a
to be
country.
able to articulate that.
Right,
Most
but
people, they don't know how to. It's not that they've got to know how to.
It's difficult, and sometimes you have to have spiritual insight to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like if I could say one thing that we need to regain an acquaintance with is that if democracy is like the promise of it ends up in an integration that you will not like. That's what the promise of it does. It means that your specialness is not greater than other people.
That's correct.
That's like the old joke about God told a person, I'll give you whatever you want. And he's thinking about it. Wow, I want this and I want this. And he said, but the only thing is, whatever I give you, I'm going to give this guy up here
I don't want
twice
it. Right,
that.
yeah.
He says, put out one of my eyes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Right. I have to tell you before we go to questions that I grew up in a household in which they told me they loved me 10 times a day, so I'm very jealous of you. I just want you to know that.
You see, that's those opposites again.
All right.
Okay. Celeste, you have the first question?
I'll ask the first question, and then while I'm asking it, if people could line up. If you have questions, come over here. I'm over here.
This is Celeste Marcus, who's the managing editor of Liberties. Yes.
While I'm asking, because we're not going to have a lot of time for Q&A, so if you want to ask something, line up behind me. We have 2 or 3.
Not all at
In other
once.
words, 3 or 4.
So much eagerness in here to line up. I can't believe it.
I think, as you said, it's seductive to try and spend the time that your time on the page or your time on the microphone or the stage reacting against what is wrong. But it's a lot more sustenance to be in what we've inherited, and also to be excited by the kind of excellence that the young have. And I want you, please, to talk a bit about the relationship between those 2 different kinds of meanings. I think they're related, but I haven't really figured out how. There is a kind of joy, or it's nourishment, the kind of nourishment that we had when you were playing the music, and the kind of nourishment that you have when you're reading a text that you know is higher than you are, it's pulling you up, and you want to write to Leon about it, or you want to ask your friend about it, to have a conversation, to force another mind to meet this thing where it is. And I feel that certainly when I find young writers, other writers who are doing something I haven't seen before, and it is not exactly the same as seeing a painting in a museum and seeing something great that other people have told me is great. It's different in kind, I think, to find something people haven't found yet, find something that you've identified as excellent because you know the quality of the thing, you've been trained. And Wynton, I'm sure that you've had this feeling when you find young musicians, like it lives in them, whatever this thing is. So if you could just talk about the relationship between those 2 kinds of riches. Go ahead.
Look, the most exciting and the most frightening, in a way, experience as a as a student of, or appreciator, or lover of beauty and art, is to find yourself faced with something you've never seen or read or heard before. So what we do in those situations, we immediately try to assimilate them to what we already know. So people walk around and, they say, oh, yeah, well, look at that picture. It's got a Kokoschka sky and a Manet shoes, and it's got a Monet tree. And there's all this shorthand that is used for trying to quickly dodge the terror of not really knowing yet what you're being confronted with. It's very exciting. It's very exciting. It doesn't happen often, because especially if you're educated and you've studied a lot, all you see are, which is all we do in most of our art criticism in every art, is references and allusions. References and allusions. But that's not, sometimes you have to unlearn that. I remember once, the one time it happened to me when it was like I was hit by a bolt of lightning. It was the first time I was in Bruges, and the first time I ever looked at Jan van Eyck's painting. And I have to tell you, I mean, I was frozen. I knew that I'd never appreciate. I looked at it and I thought, I'm not sure I know what this is. I'm not sure I have the vocabulary or the framework for it. And I mean, you've just finished a book about Soutine. Most people, when they confront Soutine, his pictures also aren't sure what to do with them. So they call him an expressionist because they know what expressionism is. So then he's an expressionist, and you wipe your brow with relief. And at the next dinner party, you can discuss Soutine because you can say, oh, what a great expressionist he was. But as you know, he wasn't an expressionist. He just happened to look. He reminded you of that. So and the same is true with music. And the funny thing is that as it gets more familiar, some of the danger and the thrill goes out. So, for example, who alive today can recognize the real danger and moral threat in Mozart's three greatest operas? Don Giovanni and Così fan tutte and The Marriage of Figaro are direct assaults on Western morality, and morality, sexual morality too. But not for us, because everything sounds so finished and polished and harmonic and beautiful and so on. And, I remember the first time I ever heard Ornette, I didn't know. And now if I listen to Lonely Woman, it sounds like Beethoven to me. I mean, it sounds traditional. It sounds traditional. So sometimes when you're confronted with something like this, you have to find a way to recover the shock. You have to find a way to recover the shock and see what is in this piece or this painting or this book that is shocking. That is shocking.
Yeah, well, it's like Ornette was so I would go to Ornette's house. It would be late, like 1 o'clock in the morning, and he would sit in a chair, and then I would sit across from him. Where do you live? And he would say, no, he lived around 30 something street, and he would say, play. We just start playing, and you sound like you, and he sound like Ornette. So, and then he would tell you something. Once he told me, he said, "It's this to what you were saying about." He said, when you play, he said, you have to remember that music is deeper than when you think about something. It's a connotation. He said, like, he talked with a lip, talk like this. Well, man, you got to understand something, man. Then when you be talking to somebody and they do this, nah, that means a lot of different things. And you have to realize, you got to understand that. See, music is deeper than that. Music is before that. The intention is in the sound, and everything you do, the intention is in the sound. So when you want to change how you play, you have to change your intention. And you can change intentions over and over again. And one thought of an idea might have 200 intentions. You see, that's us. And then he would start playing, and then he would tell you to play, and he sounded like him. He had 200 intentions in it, and then you played, and they had 2 intentions in it. So That was his way of letting you. Then he would go, and that was him saying, "Do you understand that you sound like you and I sound like me?"
And the great thing is that in any work of art, there's always more in it, in the music or the painting, than the art, than the composer or the painter.
Knows.
Yes.
No, because a lot of stuff is just a revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when there's formal things and things that have a mathematic complexity to them. And if you're in an era where people will study it and know it, it can be something. But we're not in that. We're not in. I mean, the field I'm in is not like that. We don't have any really serious scholarship in our field as of yet. One day, perhaps, we will have that. And
But you once said something to me that I never forgot. We were talking about harmony, and you said you don't need two notes for harmony. You need one note for harmony, because the implication of one note, that's already the beginning of harmony.
Right. And the opposite of harmony is unison. And the note does not have to be even in unison.
That's
of
correct.
itself.
That's it. Bravo. That's right.
Right.
That's
So
right.
it's but the kind of art of harmony.
Yeah.
And it. Well, anyway, we'll get into that because that'll be forever.
That's for the 6th birthday. Yeah. Okay. Sir.
Hi. I'm hearing you play the solos, the rides, and I'm like, the neurons are just. It was just so amazing. I think, I know where he's going. I know where Winston's going. No. Oh, he did. Oh, that was really so. Oh, that's just so fantastic. I just want to thank you so much for enriching our lives. I mean, it's really fantastic. One thing, you burst onto my consciousness in a very strange way. It was the cadenza to Haydn's trumpet concerto that you did.
Why did I do
for
that?
me, Maurice Andre was a standard, but when I heard your cadenza, I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic too. So I just want to thank you so much for
Thank you.
everything you've done.
So the question is, isn't the cadenza fantastic?
No. That cadenza is so hard. Then I had to play it every night. And when I would go to play it, I would say, why did I write this hard cadenza that I can't really play? And no, I wasn't improvising it. I wrote it out and played it. But in those days, people would improvise.
I love jazz music, and I love your jazz for young people, which is also jazz for everyone, not just young people. But, how do you bring alive the Duke Ellingtons, the Desi Gillespies, the Dave Brubecks, and, Quincy Jones, our wonderful jazz and entrepreneurial guy who just passed away. How do you do that? How do you bring the next generation to this unbelievable set of music?
Well, they're in it. You hear this? They're like they could be my grandkids. From my age, I'm 40 years older than Damo. Like, he knows about the music. He turned me on to stuff. Man, did you hear this? Did you check this out, Phil? I've been knowing him since he was a kid. His mom is a trumpet player. So they're into the music. And there's a lot of younger people who are into it. Now, from a popular standpoint, you would need a general educational improvement that we are not interested in as a country right now. One day we will be interested in it. Some of these things take a long time. Like they're not. You have a certain amount of years in your life, and as you start to get older, and you have a natural decline, you start to think about things you never thought about. How long am I going to be out here? One, and you start to realize that the problems you wanted to see solved are going to take much longer than several lifetimes. And I go back to what my mentor Al Murray used to always tell me. He said, always think about what it took for a person in 1350 to work on the wall of a cathedral, that they were never going to see anything but that wall their entire life. They were not going to see the cathedral. What did it take? Someone said, hey, I have something great for you to let's start working on this, and we're going to have this wall done by the time you die. You're like, man, I'm going to work on that damn wall. I want to do something that I can feel something pride about. So, we have to maintain, like I was fortunate to know Dizzy and to know all the great musicians, and to keep them alive, we play their music. Now, there's always a push to not play their music because they represent so much. They were people with so much humanity and dignity and intelligence and humor, and they knew so much more than you could ever imagine they knew. I could tell you story after story. Sarah Vaughan, just her piano playing alone. When I first heard Sarah Vaughan play the piano, I only thought, damn, she played the piano this good and sings? Now, you know how she sang. Her piano playing was better than that. And I could go on and on and on about who these people were. And we as a culture don't know them, but they're more documented than any people. Their recordings are made. There's discography. France and Japan maintain the music. And their YouTube is fantastic for what you can just check out from. I get on YouTube to check my students out when they're playing. And you can listen to recordings. I wish we had that when I was growing up. So, the music is here. And they were some of the one blessing in my life was to know these people because they were unbelievable people. John Lewis, Elvin Jones, sit in the house with Elvin and just talk with him. And he'd bring tears to your eyes. Just talking about the depth of humanity of Train and playing with Train. And I know we run out of time. I don't want my lady to get upset.
Not until I say one more thing. Yes. Everything you say, I mean, in what I do and what we do, the greatest thrill is to find a serious young writer. There's nothing like a really good student, nothing. Partly because it gives you confidence in the future and so on. On the other hand, I think to myself, part of the thrill of finding a great young writer is that you did that without lowering the bar.
That's it.
That you didn't make it easier or simpler. You found people who are prepared to stretch and who are not afraid to face the fact that if you're going to play serious music or write serious prose or do serious thinking, you are automatically in a counterculture of its own.
That's right.
You just are. And, and popular culture is fine and everybody should dance the night away. It's fine. But if you're talking about young people, when you meet young people who want to be lifted up, say, to the level at which my teachers lifted me and your masters lifted you, right? I mean, as you said, you sat at the feet of almost all of them. Yeah, I mean, you're a very lucky man. And I'm a lucky man, too. My teachers were, if I'd been born 10 years later, I would have missed most of them. And but the idea that a young person would be willing to go into a counterculture, it's a kind of dissent. It's a kind of dissent in our culture.
It is dissent.
Yeah.
Excellence can be a form of protest in a time
exactly.
that celebrates the kind of velocity of celebration of the decadence. But I want to say I have so many students that I love and they can play. Like they're not jokes. Like they're for real about playing. And I'm gonna just leave you with a story about I met Ella Fitzgerald on the stage of Carnegie Hall, 1987. And you think because she sings like in a girly voice, you have the kind of impression she's like a girl. Or she's like, you think she's just because her voice is so light. So I went to her, she was in a wheelchair. I said, Miss Fitzgerald, I went to introduce myself, say my name. And when I went to say who I was, she held her hand up and she said, I know who you are. She said, I know what you're trying to do. She said, good luck, baby. This is going to be very difficult for you. She never smiled. So I'm waiting kind of for my auntie moment, grandma moment. She's like, so then I hugged her and she hugged me and she patted me on my back. And when I walked away, she looked at me and went, and I understood what she was saying. Yeah. This is not a joke out here. Like you think you're going to come out here and it's going to be free, but it's not free. And I love that my kids know it's not free. Like Damo will call me at 7:00 in the morning and put it on FaceTime audio video and say, let's go, man. Let's get to it. Let's get up. Let's get busy. Let's get it in. That's his thing. Let's get it in. And for me, that's such an unbelievable blessing. Like, let's get it in, man. Let's go. Get out here. Yeah. So let's get it in.
So let's get it in. I think we should die. Wynton Marsalis and the Liberties Quartet.